excuse me, as we talk about the whole Hall of Fame and Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, are you guys ready to change gears? Because it looks like our guest is on the line. So you ready to dive into the world of comics?
Always.
Always. I knew that you were. So let's welcome to the show the one and only Mr. Ron Marz. How you doing, Ron?
I'm good, guys. How you doing?
Good. So welcome to the show, first of all. And second of all, I hope you're ready for a lot of good fun comic book talk.
Actually, I'd rather talk about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You were right in my zone there.
Oh, okay. So, how about what do you feel about Radiohead?
Does anybody know a Radiohead song? Yeah, everybody knows "Creep," but beyond that, you're putting them in for their albums, not their singles.
Right. How many actual of those albums did they sell? I wonder.
Enough, apparently. Tom York doesn't have to work another day in his life. He's not waiting tables.
Here was my question. Compared to Def Leppard, Radiohead going into the Hall of Fame before Def Leppard.
Well,
right.
They're going at the same time.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Should that have been, with the amount of songs Def Leppard has done, hits, albums sold, so forth and so on, completely eclipse Radiohead? Why would they have gone in before Def Leppard?
Well, I think this is all predicated on when your first album came out, right? Is it possible that Def Leppard and Radiohead both put out their first albums on the same year?
No. I wouldn't say that Radiohead's been around since the 80s. 1980, we found that Def Leppard was their first album. Has Radiohead been around since the 80s? I don't even have to look that up.
I think they've probably been around since the first album was 93?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so there you go.
Now we're getting into the nitty gritty, right? Ultimately,
that was my thing. That was my thing of the Hall of Fame. I don't believe that the Hall of Fame should be predicated on popularity of voting. I believe that it should be.
It's a weird, and I'm the last guy that cares about awards or Hall of Fame or any of that stuff, because it's, to me, comparing a band like Def Leppard and a band like Radiohead, they do completely different things, and to me it's impossible to say, well, this one's deserving and this one isn't, because it's such a vast gulf in between what they do. I actually love both bands, but you're never going to see them on a twin bill because they don't do the same thing. But I guess it engages people. Everybody gets to vote online, who they want to go in, and then the selections come out, and then guys like us will argue about it.
That's true. That's true. Is there a comic book Hall of Fame?
There is not. There's not one that that it is like an existing building that you can go into. Although I think the San Diego convention, or the Comic-Con International in San Diego, has just opened a museum that sort of encapsulates what the San Diego Comic Convention experience has been like since it was founded. So there's no, there's a Hall of Fame that individual artists and writers have been voted into. Okay. But there's no, it's not like going to Cooperstown to visit the plaques on the wall. There's no place that you can actually go visit this stuff, which kind of sucks. I mean, it would be great to have a comic book museum that had art and artifacts on display, but there's really nothing like that.
Which is, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, especially how popular, and how mainstream the world of comics and superheroes and everything involved in that world between movies and TV shows has gotten over the last 10 years. You would think that maybe it's time.
I think part of it is that the artwork is so valuable that the artwork from the 40s, 50s, 60s, even in the 70s has now become so valuable, and it's in the hands of so many different collectors that it would be tough to bring it all together. But I would think that, I would love for there to be a Marvel museum where there's comics and props and all that kind of stuff. And maybe that's a little bit more likely, because then you're talking about kind of a corporate, a corporate parent that can come in and spend the money to actually make this kind of place. But there have been different comic museums over the years, but none of them have lasted. None of them have been terribly mainstream or successful in the way that a Baseball Hall of Fame or the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame are. But like you said, maybe it's the rest of the world has caught up with comic culture now, so maybe it's mainstream enough to actually survive.
And I mean, how about you would think, and maybe even now, sad to say, but like with the recent passing of Stan Lee, maybe something like that could spark a real interest in something like that now.
Yeah, I hope so. Obviously, losing Stan, he's sort of the most recognized comic book creator on the planet for the most part. And obviously, a lot of that comes from the movie cameos and, the fact that Stan Lee has kind of spent the last 40 years playing Stan Lee.
Right.
So, he was sort of the ambassador in a lot of ways. I don't know that there's anybody that's really kind of ready to take over that role, just because Stan was everybody's lovable grandfather or uncle, and everybody knew Stan Lee was synonymous with comics. So I hope that somebody somewhere starts to put up the money to memorialize some of this stuff before all those giants from the 60s are gone. Really, there's not that many of them left as it is now.
Now, how about you personally? I mean, were you a huge comic book fan growing up? Was this something you always wanted to be involved with, or?
I was a comic book fan growing up, as much as the next kid. Going to buy comics from the spinner rack at the deli or the supermarket, okay. And then raging hormones take over, and you're 14, 15 years old, and you decide, well, comics are for kids. I'm gonna chase girls.
Right.
And I sort of completely fell out of comics until, senior year of high school. I think I happened to be in a mall, and there was a flea market, and there were some old comics on a table, and I happened to stumble across a few that I had had as a kid, and didn't have them anymore. They were gone or traded or whatever. And I sort of got re-engaged and then started looking at the comics that were around at that time. And this is kind of the mid-'80s when American comics and American superhero comics really started to grow up and do more mature stories and more engaging stories. And I sort of got sucked back into it at that point. And then, just kind of kept up with the hobby, and by the time I graduated from college, a year or two later, I was writing them.
Wow. So, do you remember what the first comic was that you bought?
I don't know what the first comic I bought was. I think it was either a Spider-Man or a Daredevil, because those were the ones that appealed to me when I was a little kid. More than likely Spider-Man, because everybody knew Spider-Man, and there was the old Spider-Man cartoon was on Channel 5 out of New York City when I was, probably 5 or 6 years old. So Spider-Man was the most recognizable one to me. So my suspicion is it was the mental pictures of a few different covers for issues from that era. So it's got to be one of those. I'm sure I, cajoled 15 or 20 cents out of my mom to buy me one. And the follow-up question is usually, do you still have that comic? And no, I definitely do not. I assume one of my dogs at some point got a hold of it and it's no more.
How about the comics that you've written? Do you have a collection of all the ones that you've written?
I think I do. I don't know that I've got everyone, but usually the publishers send you complimentary copies of whatever you've done. I'm probably missing a few here or there, but yeah, there are boxes down in the basement of a couple copies of each, or at least one copy of each, and I probably haven't looked in those boxes except to throw more issues in a decade.
Sure, that's wild. Now, how about like when you do like Comic Cons and stuff like that, what's probably the most popular issue that people bring to you?
It's usually Green Lantern 50, which was the big deal issue when I took over Green Lantern, and we moved the current Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, out of the title and brought in a Green Lantern named Kyle Rayner that myself and the artist Darryl Banks co-created, and he took over the book for about 15 years or something like that. So usually Green Lantern 50 is the one that I see the most. It's also got a glow in the dark cover, so people are kind of drawn to that. I remember when the issue first came out, and I was, what are you doing in the bathroom with a comic book? Well, I got the lights turned off, and I'm seeing how the cover glows.
What did you think of the reflective covers when they started coming out with them in the 90s?
Well, comics has a long, proud history of killing the golden goose every time it lays an egg. So that initial wave of sort of metallic covers and chromium covers, glow in the dark, all of the different gimmicks that went onto the covers, initially it was pretty cool. But then, like every other comic had some sort of gimmick cover on it, and eventually nobody wanted them anymore because it was just overkill. But
right.
for a lot of those comics, it was the novelty factor was pretty cool, and even now you're starting to see a little bit of that come back here and there. Chromium covers and mirrored covers and things like that are now starting to reappear a little bit. I think mostly because the generation that grew up with those gimmick covers, whether it was metallic or holograms or whatever, everybody that like thought those covers were the coolest things in the world when they were 12 or 14 years old, is now a responsible adult with disposable income, and they want to rebuy the stuff that they had as a kid.
Right. And how about, like going on to like the modern day of comics with that, all the variant different covers. As a comic fan, it drives us insane. From somebody on the other side, what's your thoughts of it?
It never bothers me because I always feel like it's there if you want it, and if you don't want it, don't buy it. I had a guy come up to me at a show, I think in Florida, a number of years ago, and I had just done an issue of Red Sonja for Dynamite. That was kind of an itch I had to scratch from seeing Red Sonja comics when I was 12 years old, and really enjoying that scantily clad lady with a sword. So I wanted to write an issue. So I ended up writing an issue of the book, just to say that just to have done it, just to get it out of my system. And I think there were like maybe 4 different covers for that particular issue. And I had a guy come up to me at this show in Florida and just complained bitterly about how many covers there were, and he's going broke trying to buy them all, and I really don't like that they do these, and it's not good for the business. And he proceeded to take out every variant cover that I had ever written and have me sign them. And I said to him, dude, you don't actually have to buy these. It's not the law. And he kind of looked at me like it had never occurred to him that he didn't actually have to buy them. But, it's a particular trick in the collector's mentality that if it's there, you got to go for it. So, it's not now part of the fabric of how comics are published. There's a few different covers, and there's always sort of chase variant covers that are 1 in 20 or 1 in 100.
Right.
I think it's ultimately it's ultimately a gift to the retailers because the retailers can get those issues and upcharge them for the audience that wants them. So while I personally don't really care if I've got all the covers, I just need one cover to know which issue of it is. But it's an aspect of the market that has been there for a while, and I think will continue to be there. Comics are that weird combination of storytelling, of entertainment, and collectability. And I think as comics sort of reach a wider audience, the collectability becomes more and more of a niche thing. But there's definitely still that collector's market who really who want those variant covers, and part of it is, I think, the sort of the thrill of the chase, the thrill of trying to find it, is appealing to a segment of the audience. So more power to them.
Now, how about you mentioned too about Red Sonja, about the itch you had to scratch to write an issue of that. I mean, what's it like? I mean, growing up as a comic book fan, collector, and then years later you're getting to scratch that itch and be able to write for a Red Sonja, a Green Lantern, a Silver Surfer. I mean, stuff like that. I mean, iconic names in the comic world. It's got to be kind of mind blowing at times.
It's I totally feel like I have the best job in the world. I get to play with all those toys or make up my own toys once in a while, and I get paid for it. So I think I'm the most fortunate guy on the face of the planet because I've had this career and thankfully still have it, where I can scratch those itches. I can check off items on the bucket list and say, well, I did that. I wrote Red Sonja or Superman or Spider-Man or whatever my list happens to be. It's really pretty cool to get to do that for a living. I essentially make up stuff for a living, and people pay me. It's it's still the kind of thing where I kind of get up every morning and pinch myself.
Now, how about too, like as a person, especially in the comic book business, where you're seeing, like this past week we had on the CW the 3-night crossover with Flash, Arrow, and Supergirl. When you see things like this happen, and you're seeing a lot of these characters that we talk about it a lot on this show, like characters we never would have expected would see the light of day and come to life on a TV screen. Like it blows us away. I mean, how about you?
Oh, completely. I mean, I grew up in the 70s where the best we could hope for was Lou Ferrigno painted green.
Right.
That was all we had. We had some lousy TV shows and some animation, and we had a really good Superman movie with Christopher Reeve. That was it. So for it to have evolved to the point where not only is there a new comic book movie opening virtually every month or every other month, and multiple TV series across different networks, they're all actually pretty good. And I was just saying to somebody the other day, like, we live in a world where there's an Ant-Man movie. Like Ant-Man got his own movie. It made a bunch of money, and it was good, and they made a sequel. Like, if you had told me that even when I started my career at Marvel more than 25 years ago, my head would have exploded. It's just such a sea change from where we used to be, where, like, what we showed in the comics, the kind of stories that I broke into the industry writing with Silver Surfer, these cosmic epics. There was no way to show that in a movie and not have it come off looking like some sort of $1.98 budget Roger Corman spectacle. You just couldn't do it. The only place you could get that stuff was in a comic book. But now technology has caught up to what we could do in comics, so that anything we can show in a comic can go up on a screen and look real. So it's pretty it's pretty mind blowing, and I've always felt that comics were always way ahead of the curve in terms of storytelling and the kind of entertainment that we put in comics. But now the rest of the world is caught up. Now, now there's not just a comic book universe. There's a cinematic universe, and everybody knows it. Everybody goes to see these movies, including vast numbers of people who have never read a comic in their life and will never read a comic in their life, but they're going to be there in line opening weekend to see the next installment of Avengers.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's definitely a changed world.
Yeah, even honestly, 10, 15 years ago, I would have never expected us to be at the point where we are now, where superhero storytelling and you mentioned the crossover with the 3 shows, just the fact that there's a coherent universe and they crossed over and there are different Earths and there are different versions of the same character running around. Like that was so much inside baseball kind of stuff in comics that you figured John Q. Public is never going to understand any of that stuff. But,
right.
But now it's on network television.
It's a beautiful thing. It really is. So now you have coming out, or is it out already? The graphic novel, which you've worked on with artist Darryl Banks, who you've worked with in the past many times, called Harken's Raiders.
Yeah, it's not out yet. We're in the midst of finishing it up, so it'll be expected to be finished probably by March of 2019. Okay. So it's called Harken's Raiders. It's a World War II story. So there's no Green Lantern power rings. There's no kryptonite. There's no silver surfboards. It's just a straight up World War II story with nothing super heroic, nothing supernatural about it. And I'm working with Darryl Banks, as you said, who was my artist on Green Lantern for my entire 7-year run. So in that sense, we're kind of getting the band back together. Darryl and I haven't worked on a project together except for a short story here or there since I left Green Lantern in about 2000. So it's just a pleasure to be working with him again. So we're doing this World War II graphic novel, which was actually suggested from an idea by an Army veteran that Darryl and I both know, who sort of came up with this story about a commando team that is parachuted into occupied Finland to grab up a Nazi scientist who, of course, holds the key to defeating the Nazi war machine in Europe. It's supposed to be an easy mission, but everything goes wrong. Everything goes sideways. So our story is about how these guys try to pull off the mission with everything going wrong. It's called Harken's Raiders, and it's actually on Kickstarter right now for another week or so. And we're inching up towards the goal. So assuming we get the funding, which is the plug for you guys to go to Kickstarter and search Harken's Raiders or search my name and pledge to the goal. We're doing a hardcover oversized graphic novel so that we can tell the story of heroes who aren't guys in capes and long underwear.
Yeah, I mean something like that. I mean, where it was a lot more, mainstream doing that. I remember growing up like with the 70s and 80s collecting comics like Sergeant Rock and Combat Comics and stuff like that, where you saw a lot more military-based comics, and it seems like it's really gotten away from that over the years.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when I was a real small kid, I actually didn't read a whole lot of superhero comics. I gravitated towards the war comics, Sergeant Rock and Enemy Ace and GI Combat. That's the stuff that I liked when I was probably far too young to be actually reading those comics, but those are the ones I plucked off the spinner rack. So very much in the 60s and 70s, war comics were kind of a staple of both Marvel and DC, and even more so DC, because they had Sergeant Rock, which was obviously a very long-running series by Joe Kubert. And in the last 20 years or so, we've really gotten away from war comics coming out from any of the major publishers. So we decided we wanted to do this story, and it felt like the best way to do it was to just do it ourselves. We're going to publish it through a publishing company called Ominous Press, which I'm a partner in. And, we just decided, look, we'll do this ourselves. We'll tell the story the way we want to tell it and take it directly to the audience.
Now, how about, that and I'm kind of referring to the music business as well, where the modern era, thankfully to things like the internet, Kickstarter, etc., where now artists, whether it's comic or music, etc., they have that opportunity now to do their own thing independently and create their own stories or music. Do you like doing that more, or would you rather be doing with a DC or a Marvel?
Well, I still do that stuff too. I still work for other publishers. It's I always kind of think of it as a buffet table, and you don't want to go to a buffet table and the only thing they got is pepperoni pizza. Right? So you want to have a bunch of different flavors on the buffet table, and doing my own creator-owned stuff and doing work-for-hire gigs for Marvel or DC or Dynamite or Image or Aspen, IDW, a bunch of the other publishers I worked for, they're all different flavors, and they're all, really enjoyable flavors. Like I said, I think I have the best job in the world. But as a writer, I get to sample all of those dishes because I can juggle 3, 4, 5 different projects at once. For an artist, it's a little tougher because the artist is basically stuck drawing one thing at a time. It's the best you can hope for is drawing a page a day of comic book art, and it doesn't leave a whole lot of room to juggle multiple projects. Artists tend to do one thing and then move on to the next. So I kind of feel like I'm in the catbird seat a little bit because I have the ability to juggle different projects and do different things at the same time, whereas Daryl he's buckled in and he's drawing Harken's Raiders on a daily basis.
You mentioned earlier about Daryl, and it's funny because actually one of my questions was, and you said, it's kind of like you got the band back together, and one of the questions I had written down was, do you kind of refer to yourself, that you and Daryl, like you're like the Lennon to his McCartney?
It's actually, we're sort of more like an old married couple at this point. It's the collaboration between a writer and an artist is there's a bit of alchemy there, and the ones that you click with, you work with as often as you can. And once in a while, you find somebody that you don't really click with. It's not because you don't like them or they're not good at what they do, but your sensibilities are just different enough that it's not a graceful marriage. I had a ball working with Daryl for 7 years on Green Lantern, and the chance to get back with him. I guess it's a little Lennon and McCartney, because you want that collaboration to lead to something that neither of you could do by yourself.
Right.
And I don't just mean that in terms of the job descriptions, because I can't draw to save my life. I mean, gun to my head, I couldn't draw you an appropriate picture. But I can see what I want to be on the page in my head. I mean, that's why I do what I do, is because I can envision what I would like the story to look like, and then work with an artist to write a script. The script goes to the artist, and then he or she interprets it, and hopefully we wind up with something that neither one of us could have come up with by ourselves. We wind up with a sum that's greater than any of the parts, and that's absolutely the way it works with Daryl because I give him what's in my head, and then he makes it even better.
So I want to, my co-host here, Mr. Nick Wilkinson and Jimmy Giannetti, both huge comic book fans. I know they have some questions for you, so I wanted to let them get their questions in as well. Nick, go ahead. Start it off with you. I know you got a bunch of questions for Ron.
Okay, well, it wasn't so much a question as much as maybe just a conversation topic, but I'm looking over some of the stuff, and one of the things that I really loved was the Batman Tarzan stuff. And as I was looking over some of the other stuff, there seems to be this really cool, like you do modern stuff, of course, because you know that's what's out there now. But there's a little bit of Tarzan, there's a little bit of the Phantom, there's some of that sort of like classicness. So I guess, I wanted to talk about that a little bit. Like, what gets you going? Like, what are some of your classic throwbacks like that? Because for me, Tarzan was it growing up. Between the old TV shows, the Greystoke movie, it's just awesome to see something like that. It was rare that you got to see a continuation of content. You know what I mean?
Oh, you're totally living in my neighborhood, man. That's some of the stuff that I'm fondest of. That real pulp kind of storytelling, whether it's Tarzan, the Phantom, John Carter of Mars, The Shadow, like all of that stuff was on my bucket list. Like I got to write a Phantom story. I got to write a Shadow story. I've done Tarzan. I did a run on John Carter of Mars. All of that stuff was like hugely formative for me at that kind of golden age of science fiction, which everybody knows is 12 years old. That's what I latched onto. So to be able to do that kind of stuff, even though it's seen as as older, and there's not as wide an audience for that stuff as there is for Wolverine or for Batman, but it's still there, and I love that stuff a bunch. I had a ball doing Tarzan Batman. It was just that was a dream gig. I do a weekly Sunday couple of strips at Edgar Rice Burroughs Inc. I think it's just EdgarRiceBurroughs.com, of Korak, which is Tarzan's son, and adaptations of the Mucker novels, which is kind of an anti-hero thing that Burroughs did. Just because I feel like I owe a huge debt to Edgar Rice Burroughs, because his writing when I was just the right age made such a huge impression on me that I feel like, to a great extent, reading that stuff, reading Robert E. Howard, seeing Star Wars in the theater at 11 years old, all of that stuff, sort of turned me into what I am today. So anytime I get a chance to do Tarzan or the Phantom, I actually just wrote a short Phantom story for an Irish publisher named Lightning Strike, which somehow has a Phantom license for maybe Ireland and even into Europe. So I was like, those dudes have the Phantom license. I'm calling them. So I got to do another short Phantom story, and I always get the question about, well, what's the one thing you want to do in your career? What's the one thing left that you haven't been able to do? And my answer is the same every time, which is I want to write a monthly Tarzan comic.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, I'll tell you, man, it was like I remember it almost clear as day. It was like 2001, and there was just this like convergence of events. There was a Witchblade movie coming out on TV, and I was sort of real hyped to see that. And then Smallville came out, and I was really excited to see that. And then I had passed the comic book shop and decided to go in, and I saw a cover of a comic, and it was Batman and Tarzan tied back to back, and they were like underwater, and there were all these like crocodiles around them. And I was like, I don't know what the hell this is, but like I'm sold. And that was sort of what drove me back into, like, the world of comics in between that sort of, like, teenager, young man, you know, era that you were talking about earlier. And, like, clear as day, I can picture that comic on the shelf.
It's still one of my favorite comics, one of my favorite covers. It was a pinch me moment. You know, it was like we went to DC and Dark Horse, which had the Tarzan license at the time, and it just seemed like this is a natural. How come this hasn't happened before? And in that era, certainly the comic book companies, Marvel and DC in specific, but just in general, everybody was a lot cooler about doing crossovers because the companies need each other financially, and now obviously Marvel and DC are making $1 billion on TV and in the movies, so they don't need each other quite so much. But that was just a very obvious one that I couldn't believe nobody had done before, and lo and behold, they actually said, "Yeah, go ahead and do that," and then did it, loved the hell out of it, and then actually pitched them on a sequel, which would have been Tarzan and Batman in Gotham City, when Tarzan's golden lion gets captured and taken to a circus in Gotham City.
Oh, wow.
And maybe you guys don't know this, but there are certain circus aspects to the Batman stories that seem to be a natural fit, i.e. clowns and maybe some aerialists getting killed to leave an orphan boy for Bruce Wayne to raise. So we would have played with all that stuff in the sequel, but that one never got off the ground.
That would have been really cool. I think Tarzan and Batman go well together because they come from the same stock. You know, they're not really superheroes as much as they're peak, physical performance type heroes. And one, there's a lineage there, and I think that's a real awesome way to sort of honor that.
Oh yeah, and look, Tarzan and Batman are basically the same guy. They're both they're both noblemen who were orphaned as babies, as Tarzan as a baby and Batman as a small child. It's just that one of them happened to get raised by apes and the other one got raised by a butler, but they're essentially the same dude.
Right. That's really cool, man. That's. So let me ask you this: with everything that's going on with the DC universe online, with the CW universe, with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is there anything that you're still waiting for to see sort of that live action adaptation of?
I'd like a good Green Lantern movie because I don't think we got one the last time. It was not what it just felt like there were too many cooks in the kitchen on that movie, and it didn't turn out to be what I think anybody really hoped for. But I actually I've had my fill of live action superhero movies, and I'll go see all of them, and I still enjoy the hell out of them. But I'd actually like to see more animated superhero stuff. And obviously the Spider-Man movie, the Into the Spider-Verse that's coming out right now, hopefully will spur some more of that stuff because, anybody that I know who has seen the movie is absolutely ecstatic about it. So I've always felt like, it's cool when you do a live action movie and Wolverine's wacky hair is, you actually talk Hugh Jackman into wearing that hairstyle. That's cool, and that's obviously what the mass audience really wants, is they want, quote-unquote, real people to be superheroes. But I would like to see more animation, more stuff like apparently Spider-Verse, and, to me, the best Fantastic Four movie that's ever been done is called The Incredibles.
Right. No, and Into the Spider-Verse is big for Marvel because I think that DC has firmly planted themselves when it comes to their animated movies. They have a lot of really great stuff out there when it comes to animated features. when it comes to animated series. And Marvel's kind of hit or miss lately, but this one has an awful lot of buzz behind it. But what I'm big on right now is the live-action series, not the movies, the different interpretations. And we just got news yesterday that there's going to be a live-action version of Blue Devil, and I'm so excited because it's so obscure. I just never thought it would happen.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember reading Blue Devil sort of when I rediscovered comics, and feeling like that was a book that I was kind of in on the ground floor for. Picked up the first issue and just liked that whole world. But yeah, like I said, I mean, who can imagine that there's an Ant-Man movie? Who can imagine that Blue Devil is actually going to be on TV? It's just kind of mind-boggling. But that's the world we live in now, where no stone is left unturned in terms of bringing this rich universe of characters to life. It's apparently it's always been a comic book world, and we were living in it, but we just didn't know it.
Yeah, that's what everyone was secretly a fan. Nobody was talking about it.
Well, you just have to, it was, these are obviously stories and characters that people respond to. You just had to give it to them in a different package.
Yeah,
that's very true.
It is true.
So, Janetti, did you have any questions?
Yeah, actually, I'm a big Hal Jordan fan, Green Lantern Hal Jordan fan. What was it? Let me see if I can phrase this correctly. Sorry. What was it like, and what led up to Green Lantern 50? Turning a hero evil, technically. I mean,
it was there's two answers. The first answer is that the death of Superman was a huge deal. Came out, like a year before. Was a big deal storyline. Got a huge amount of notice and press, and obviously sold a bunch of copies. And then Bane broke Batman's back, and that got a huge amount of press and sold a lot of copies, and frankly, made a lot of money for the publisher. So, if it worked twice, do it again. So, the real impetus of it was, well, we did, fairly big deal storylines with Batman and Superman. Let's move on to one of the other characters. And the other aspect is that Green Lantern was not selling well. Comics are a shotgun marriage of art and commerce. Maybe the writers and the artists are more concerned with the artistic side of things, but the publisher is ultimately concerned with how many copies did we sell? Are we a profitable business? So Green Lantern was not selling well, did not have a lot of interest in it. So the kind of the eye of Sauron fell on Green Lantern, and they said, well, let's do something, let's do a big deal storyline with Green Lantern. But the difference was that Superman got not dead anymore, and Batman's back got a lot better. But in our case, the thing that we were doing was going to be permanent. There wasn't going to be there wasn't going to be 6 months later Hal Jordan comes back. As they pitched the story to me, this is permanent. There's going to be a new Green Lantern, and they gave me like a page and a half of notes of what the Emerald Twilight storyline was going to be. Like how Hal Jordan was going to sort of fall from grace and turn into, if not an out-and-out villain, at least an antagonist who was going to be somebody that the rest of the heroes were going to be fighting. And then after that, they just kind of turned me loose to do what I do and make up a new Green Lantern. So in a lot of respects, I kind of felt like the job wasn't really how we moved Hal Jordan off stage, because that was going to happen no matter who did the gig. That was part of the story, no matter if I was going to write it or anybody else. The real trick was to create a Green Lantern that was going to be attractive enough to the audience to get the audience to stick around after the big deal controversial storyline, getting everybody to stick around and get invested in the new character. So it was removing Hal was an editorial decision that I executed, and then building the new Green Lantern, building Kyle Rayner, was something that they really kind of left to me and Daryl. And obviously, there were approvals and they were looking over our shoulder as we went, but to great extent, they didn't impose. DC editorial did not impose a lot of their will on what we were doing. They kind of gave us the freedom to be creative and recast the book in the way that we saw fit.
Right. That's interesting. I just find it, I didn't know how much input you had in what happened to him. If they just said turn him and decide what you're doing, or if you're saying that they basically told you exactly what they wanted.
Well, like I said, yeah, they gave me for the 3 issues that turned into Emerald Twilight. They gave me a page and a half of written notes. Here are the story beats for these 3 issues, and then I filled in the rest. I filled in the details and the motivations and the specifics of the scenes, and then wrote the scripts. But that was as far as we really got in terms of DC saying this is what we want you to do. After issue 50, they really gave us a huge amount of freedom to make up the kind of story that we wanted, and frankly, my whole motivation for the whole thing was like, look, if the job here is to take Hal Jordan out of the story, is to take him out of the issue and do something else because Hal was not selling, I said, look, let's do something as far afield from what Hal is as we can get. So to me, Hal was he was Chuck Yeager. He was a hero before he ever got to be Green Lantern. He's a test pilot. That's
right.
That's pretty much worthy of telling a comic book about the guy without the superhero costume. So my take was, well, if Hal was already a hero, let's do a story about somebody becoming a hero, somebody growing into the role eventually. And that's where Kyle came from, very much inspired by the Spider-Man comics that I read as a kid, by Peter Parker being just you or me or anybody else reading the book. He was totally relatable as a character because, he had to make sure that the rent was paid and, get a date and make sure that he could have a job and make sure that Aunt May gets her heart medicine. And so, like, all this stuff that he had to deal with that had nothing to do with Spider-Man, that was of interest to me as well as what he did as Spider-Man. So that's what we tried to do with Kyle is make him a 3-dimensional character so that the audience was engaged, whether he was in costume or out of it.
Very good.
Nice. So I have one last question. Go back to Harken's Raiders before we let you go. I went through and I saw there you had the list of characters, and I wanted to know more about Alfie the Bulldog.
Everybody wants to know about Alfie the Bulldog. Well, I mean, the short answer is, it's a World War II story. We got to have a bulldog. But he is actually Alfie appears in the opening sequence in the story, which is a sequence with a bomber that the Harkens team has to parachute out of. So Alfie is actually the mascot for the bomber crew that takes them on their mission. And I guess that was not terribly unusual for bomber crews or even other other crews in other aspects of the war to have some sort of mascot, to have some sort of animal that was somebody to take care of. So assuming we get funded on Kickstarter, if we hit the first stretch goal for Harken's Raiders, there's actually going to be an 8-page Alfie story that's an extra that we'll put into the book of basically Alfie thwarting Nazi saboteurs on the airbase, because obviously a story about a bulldog fighting Nazis is about as good as comic debt.
Absolutely. Now something else too, going to the Kickstarter. You guys are doing, actual physical copies, but you're gonna have digital copies too. And the whole digital comic thing is still kind of like I haven't grasped it. As a comic book writer, are you a fan of the digital comics or?
I'm torn on it because, personally I want the physical book. I want like a big physical book. I want something I can put on the shelf. That's why we're doing Harken's in an oversized format, hardcover. It's a shelf book. It's a thing that you have as a keepsake and an artifact of the story experience. But as a guy who's worked in comics for more than 25 years and has been getting comp copies of comics for all of those 25 years, and a guy who haunts bookstores as it is, I got a lot of books. They're on the shelves. They're stacked up on the floor. They're in boxes in the basement. So from that aspect, I totally get why digital comics are beloved by a lot of people. It's really not the way I want to read a comic, and it's certainly not the way I want to preserve a comic because, like I said, I want a hardcover. I want it on the shelf. But like the fact that somebody could have like all of the comics that I have in my house, and there are a lot of them, on their iPad, and that's the only thing they have, with literally thousands upon thousands upon thousands of comics loaded up on it. To a great extent, that makes a lot more sense than me lugging around boxes. And I think it's a generational thing. I think like my kids are perfectly content to read something digitally as well as read a print copy. I think we're heading in the direction where there will be more and more of a readership for digital, both from the saving standpoint, the space standpoint, and just because people are quite comfortable reading on a screen.
Right.
I've seen a few times where the supposition is that the single issue floppy, the spinner rack comic that you go that you still buy at a convenience store or a Barnes and Noble or something like that, that single issue 22 pages, that eventually will go away. I mean, there will always be some form of monthly comic, but that will ultimately be a package that people won't get. They'll either get the lovely hardcover collected edition that goes on the shelf, or they'll get the digital. So that more disposable form of it will maybe just be for collectors that want variant covers, CGC graded comics. But for the mass market, for the mass audience, I think people are going to be reading stuff digitally and in collections, and not so much as a single issue product, because that's the way our culture is being set up. I mean, how many people actually watch weekly TV shows now? If you can get the thing and binge it, that's what everybody does. Nobody gets the new Daredevil series on Netflix and watches one a week. They watch them all in a weekend. So I think that's the way comics are eventually headed, where you're going to get a 6-issue story arc in one package
Right.
And then you're going to wait 6 months to get another 6-issue package.
I don't know. I mean, I see it that way, but then I guess the old schoolness, I like to have that physical copy.
I do too, and I think there's always going to be a niche market for that stuff, right? I think, but we are we're the exception, not the rule. Or the rule is going to be people who just want to read the stories, that aren't so much the Wednesday warriors who are in the shop every week.
Right.
They're just people who wander through Barnes and Noble or a Walmart or whatever, and pick up the whole story at once.
Right.
I think that's ultimately what comics have to do, is make themselves available to as many people as possible in as many different packages as possible, so that the audience gets to choose how they want to consume it.
Now, how about also too, like the world of Comic Cons? Do you do the circuit a lot? Do you come out here to the Philadelphia area a lot with the Comic Cons, or?
I haven't been in Philly in a while. I know I used to do the Wizard World Philly shows. I remember fondly going to the Reading Market for lunch every day to get to get like Amish food, because it was awesome. So I haven't been to Philly in, I don't know, at least 5 or 6 years, but I do a fair number of shows. I try not to do more than one a month, maybe 2 a month for some months, because ultimately time at a show is time that you're not spending at the desk, and the work's got to get done one way or the other. If you go do a show every weekend somewhere, that means you're blowing off a bunch of work days that you should actually be devoting to getting the job done. But there's always a fair number of shows. I'll be in New Orleans, I think the first weekend of January, and then Roanoke, Virginia, and Long Beach, California in February. So, if somebody wants to bring me to the warm weather in the middle of January or February, I'm usually okay with that. It's a case by case basis, but that's just that's an aspect of what we do now. And there's a financial aspect. You can make money at shows, and there's also a promotional aspect where you're out there hawking your stuff and introducing what you're doing to people. The business of conventions is probably just as big as the business of comics. It used to be, when I first broke in, there were a few large conventions every year, 3 or 4 of them, and some sort of medium-sized ones, and that was it. And then it turned into, well, there's a big or medium show like every weekend for 6 months. And now the situation was, there's a big show or a fairly large regional show, 3 or 4 or 5 of them every weekend except for holiday weekends. It's grown exponentially, so that the opportunities for creators to appear at those shows has grown exponentially, and there's always a little bit of competition to get guests. I think last year there was a weekend in May where I actually had, I think there were 5 like sizable shows, 5 real deal shows, and I had invitations to 4 of them. And I just thought, man, this is nuts. This is just not. This is the new paradigm that we're in. And I think actually one of the shows was Philadelphia. I think the one that I wasn't invited to was the Philly show. But it was Canada, Buffalo, California. I mean, it's just there's a show somewhere, within 500 miles. It seems like every weekend.
Absolutely.
And now the shows are an international international phenomenon as well. And anytime I can get invited to a show and I use my passport, I'm all for it.
That's awesome. Well, Ron, I want to thank you, man. This was great hanging out and answering all our questions and talking everything comic related and even Rock and Roll Hall of Fame related.
It was a pleasure, guys. Yeah, we'll do the rest of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame next time, I guess. Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which I actually visited thanks to a comic book convention in Cleveland. So it's all related. The con invited me in, and I said, well, you got to bring me in a day early so I can go to the Rock and Roll Hall. So
nice.
Thanks to comics, I went to see Joe Strummer's handwritten Clash lyrics. There's the lesson, kids. Is comics can take you everywhere.
Where should we take everybody? So we send everybody to Kickstarter, and they can look up either Ron Marz, that's Ron Marz, or Harken's Raiders. And how about you? And where to keep up to date with you and appearances, et cetera, et cetera?
I have a Facebook page, but it's a fan page, so gun to my head, I couldn't actually tell you the address of it. Like, I don't know what the name of it is, but it's more for throwing information out there. The best place to keep up with me is Twitter, where I am just at Ron Marz, and I'm on there. I'm on there every day because I sit at my desk every day and the window's open. So that's where the promo is, and that's where the feedback comes from, and I actually like the back and forth with the audience that you get on Twitter. It's more immediate, and it's actually briefer. So if you want to yell at me, come to Twitter.
Sounds like a plan. Ron, thank you again, and everybody go to Kickstarter. Like I said, look up Ron Marz or Harken's Raiders. And donate. Let's kickstart this. It's almost there. It's 3/4 of the way there, I'm out.
We're getting there. Getting close. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate you having me on.
You're welcome. Thanks, Ron. Take care. Everybody, there he goes. Ron Marz. How was that?
That's cool, man. There's a lot to unpack there. Like, we could have probably just picked like one book and talked about that for an hour. Like,
right.
You know what I mean?
I like the fact, like, with you with the Batman Tarzan, how it was like, here is this guest that was proposed to us, and everybody being big comic book fans, and here something that was pivotal in your life, you know what I mean, that brought you back to the world of comics, and here's the guy that created.
Dude, like, I can close my eyes and picture that cover. Like, it's such a cool cover. They're like tied back to back, like old school, and they're in like the bottom of a river or something, and there's just like crocodiles all around them.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I was just like, holy cow, like, what the hell's going on here? Like, you know what I mean?
Oh,